Biden and the Democrats and all these spending bills. It's wild. Just trillions of dollars being tossed around like it's nothing. How are we supposed to think of that?
Well, you have to think about just in general the amount of spending and the amount of money printing over the last decade and a half continues to devalue the dollar, continues to take trust and faith away from our government. I mean, it used to be the government was supposed to protect our property rights and you do a couple of things. But the amount of spending has exploded. Forget about the COVID spending. I mean, just before COVID alone, we had run up I think it was $23 trillion deficit. And then with COVID on top of that, we're now $28 trillion in. When you have that COVID relief money and they say, okay, we're going to issue debt for that, who do you think paid for that? I mean, who across the world paid for that? Nobody paid for that. We went out, the Federal Reserve printed quote unquote money, fake money, and then we bought it back from the government. So there's this sort of whole house of cards scenario where we have a Federal Reserve that's getting more and more involved with aiding and abetting the reckless spending of the government, which is creating more concern both within the United States and worldwide about the faith of the dollar.
There's so many things in there that we need to talk about. So I like the idea of the trust. It's eroding our trust in the government. Speak more to that for a minute. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, so if you think about currency and particularly something what we call fiat currency that isn't backed by anything, I'm sure you've already talked about the fact that the dollar used to be backed by gold, but now it's just backed by the faith of the US government. And the reality is that the government doesn't produce anything, generally speaking. So that means the faith in the economy as well as the faith for the government to shepherd and protect the dollar. Unfortunately, what they've been doing with outsized spending, with allowing the Federal Reserve to manipulate and get involved in the markets, both on an interest rate perspective and then affecting the money supply, it means that there is less faith in terms of interference in the market and what could be done to the dollar, which is what the whole discussion about money is, right? It's about us all agreeing and coming together and saying that we have faith that this has some agreed upon level of value. And as we know from a supply demand standpoint, if you create a lot more of something, then it becomes less scarce and it has less value. And unfortunately, that's what the government and Fed together have been doing for, as I said, more than a decade.
I want to get back to the Fed in a second, but so this is the one reason why I own gold and silver is because of this very problem here with massive inflation. What are some steps that the government could take to prevent the inflation from coming? Like what could they do? Because the debt is already, as you said, 29 trillion, right? Like what are we even talking about here? So I guess it's twofold. When will it hit? Because it has to. Slash, what can the government do to prevent it from hitting or keep kicking the can down the road?
All right, so when is it going to hit is the $29 trillion and counting question. And I often liken it to driving towards the end of the cliff and saying, well, I haven't fallen off yet. I'm just going to go a little bit further, a little bit further. We don't necessarily know where that edge is, but we know that it's close. And so as we continue to keep pushing closer towards it, at some point you fall off. And if I had that crystal ball, Mike, I would be on a yacht in the Mediterranean right now, not having this conversation with you. You know that it's very likely to happen. We just don't know when. We've seen this in countries around the world, whether it's Turkey or Zimbabwe or whatnot, that have printed tons of money and saw their own currency devalued. Even within the last week, I saw some research that the dollar vis-a-vis other currencies is on the decline. And I've got a paper right here. The Sri Lankan rupee last week was up 1.5% versus the dollar. I mean, what is that all about? So we know that there has been some level of devaluation of the dollar. What we need to do And I think it's not that Congress doesn't have the knowledge about this, but they lack the courage and the conviction to do this. They need to get spending under control. We cannot continue to run deficits because the only way we finance that is with debt. I mean, frankly, we need a much smaller government that's spending far less. Before COVID, all three levels of government, federal, state, and local, was about $8.1 trillion. That's equivalent to the median household family income on a per household basis. That's insane. They're just spending too much money. So they're aware of this. This is all they care about the short term and their power. They're not thinking long term because, especially with administrations, those turn over every 4 to 8 years. So, I'm going to get as much power as I can today and let somebody else pick up on the backside. We call that moral hazard when you undertake these decisions, and they're risky, but you're not participating in that risk. And unfortunately, as I said, just no conviction to get this done.
Wow, that was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like,
Subscribe. Get more.